Hey guys, tonight we begin with a narrow pocket of old New York, the kind of place you would never step into unless you had a death wish or a very questionable sense of adventure. You stand at the mouth of a crooked passageway that smells like boiled laundry, coal soot, and secrets people dropped there on purpose. The walls lean so close that you swear they are whispering about you as you slip inside. Lantern smoke hangs low. Laundry lines sag overhead like tired ghosts, and every whetstone feels like it is watching. This is Double Alley, the cramped little world where the city dumped everything it did not want to admit it created. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable. Let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You squeeze into Double Alley, and the city you thought you knew slips right off your shoulders like a coat that never fit well in the first place. The space tightens around you until you feel as if the buildings are trying to decide whether to crush you or simply swallow you whole. The air grows cooler and heavier, thick with smoke that tastes faintly like burnt onions and someone's unfortunate attempt at stew. You can still hear the distant rumble of carriage wheels, but it reaches you in a muffled way, as if the alley has placed cotton in your ears to keep your focus where it wants it. Your boots scrape over uneven stones, slick with something you hope is just last night's rain, though the faint sheen on top suggests otherwise. Every sound sharpens. A door creaks somewhere above you. A cat yowls from a hidden ledge, and a pot clangs against brick as some unseen hand flings it from a window with the casual confidence of someone who does this often. You step deeper, and the world narrows into layers of shadow that tug at the edges of your vision, as if curious about what kind of fool wanders in here willingly. The laundry overhead flutters like a long line of exhausted flags, each shirt and sheet carrying its own scent, from soap that has not rinsed out properly to whatever cologne someone tried and immediately regretted. A cord hangs low enough that you have to duck, and you can almost hear the alley snicker at how neatly it caught you. The walls lean inward with the enthusiasm of gossips hungry for your first mistake. Bits of crumbling mortar fall near your shoulder, like applause for entering their little kingdom. Farther in, voices weave through the dimness. A couple argues about a missing loaf of bread, each accusing the other with the confidence of people who have both lied many times before. A child sings a tune entirely off-key, but loudly enough to compensate. Somewhere ahead, a burst of laughter crackles, sharp and quick, followed by the sound of feet slapping stone as someone sprints away. You cannot tell if they are running from trouble or toward it, and honestly, neither option seems encouraging. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust as lantern light spills through a crooked doorway. A man leans there, smoking something that smells like pine needles and old boots. He watches you with the slow, deliberate blink of someone who has seen newcomers wander in and disappear just as quickly. You nod in a way that you hope communicates both confidence and mild friendliness. He nods back, without moving anything except his eyelids, which feels vaguely judgmental. The deeper you go, the more the alley reveals its strange symphony. Water drips rhythmically from a pipe into a dented bucket. Rats scurry with surprising organization, like tiny managers on an urgent schedule. Someone above you slams a window shut, then immediately opens it again as if reconsidering the argument they planned to shout into the street. You feel the alley's pulse now, steady and alive, beating beneath the grime and clutter. Yet there is something else too, a shift you sense in the air. The city behind you felt wide and impatient, always pushing forward, always demanding. Here, the space holds you still, almost protectively, though you suspect that is not its intention. It studies you. It waits for your next step. You realize that every person, every noise, even every brick seems aware of you in a way that borders on unsettling. Still, you move forward because turning back would admit you are overwhelmed, and you refuse to let an alley that smells this questionable win. The shadows thicken as if layering themselves for emphasis, and each sound grows crisp, from the snap of a twig under your heel to the hiss of a kettle somewhere out of sight. You breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with the scent of coal smoke and damp stone, and for a moment, the entire place seems to tighten around you, curious and watchful, as if waiting to see whether you belong here or if you will be just another story whispered about in the dark. You move deeper into the alley, and the crowd reveals itself slowly, like the place is peeling back its layers just to show you what kind of people squeeze their lives into this narrow ribbon of space. At first you think it is just a few residents lingering in doorways or leaning on splintered railings, but the longer you look, the more faces emerge from shadowed corners. Families sit on stoops carved out of old crates, their conversations tumbling together in a steady hum. A woman stirs something in a pot that smells suspiciously like cabbage pretending to be soup, while two children chase each other through puddles with a kind of joy that suggests they have no idea the rest of the city would faint if they stepped foot here. A man with a thick coat and boots that have lived more lives than he has nods at you as he carries a stack of chipped bowls balanced dangerously high. Behind him, a young girl negotiates with a boy twice her size over a chipped marble, and she is clearly winning. Every direction you turn reveals another tiny piece of life, stitched together from scraps and stubbornness. These people do not just survive here, they build routines out of chaos, stringing together moments of normalcy like mismatched beads. Farther along, a group of wanderers huddles around a barrel fire that crackles with an enthusiasm that suggests it has been fed more than just firewood. They pass around a dented tin cup half full of something steaming, each sip followed by the kind of satisfied sigh that tells you whatever is in there is either delicious or dangerously strong. One man plays a battered fiddle that wheezes more than it sings, but the others tap their boots in rhythm anyway, grateful for music that breaks up the monotony. Then come the hustlers, sliding between crowds with the smooth confidence of people who know exactly where every loose coin and unwatched pocket lives. You can spot them by the way they move, always a little too quick, always a little too aware. One leans against a wall, shuffling a deck of cards that somehow never leaves his hands, even as he gestures, coughs, or scratches his chin. Another sells tiny trinkets from a crate set up like a makeshift stall, offering charms, buttons, and items whose purpose you cannot identify, but which he promises will change your life. You suspect he has said the same line 100 times today alone. You also notice the watchers, the ones perched in windows or leaning over rickety balconies. They do not speak, but they see everything. Their eyes track you with quiet calculation, gauging whether you are trouble, lost, or simply curious enough to wander in places polite society pretends do not exist. A few of them soften their expressions when they recognize familiar neighbors below. Others remain stone-faced, as if carved into the brick itself. What surprises you most is how these wildly different groups coexist without tearing the alley apart. A mother calls her children inside, then hands a spare roll to a wanderer who thanks her with a nod. A hustler nudges a little boy away from a broken plank that would have given him splinters the size of knitting needles. Even the fiddler pauses long enough to help an older woman shift her stool out of the wind. This place is held together by frayed ropes and thin patience, yet somehow manages to form a community in spite of everything stacked against it. You realize that the alley is less a neighborhood and more a strange ecosystem where every type of person finds a spot to fit, even if that spot is barely wide enough to stand in. The families bring warmth, the wanderers bring stories. The hustlers bring an energy that keeps everyone alert, and as you watch them move around one another with practiced familiarity, You start to understand how this narrow stretch of brick and shadow becomes a home. Not because it is safe or comfortable, but because the people inside it choose to make it one. You follow the scent before you fully understand what you are doing, pulled along by a wave of boiling cabbage so powerful it might as well have hands. It drifts through the alley in warm, persistent curls, weaving around crates, laundry lines, and people who have long since accepted that this smell will haunt their clothes forever. You try to convince yourself it is just ordinary cabbage. But ordinary cabbage does not usually announce itself with this level of confidence. Whatever is cooking could probably peel paint off a ship hull, yet the aroma still manages to lure you in like a stubborn charm. You trace it past a leaning doorway where two men argue over who owes whom, a loaf of bread, and past a boy practicing a magic trick with a coin that keeps slipping through his fingers and rolling away. The scent gathers strength as you approach a dim corridor barely wide enough for your shoulders. You squeeze through, feeling the rough brick scrape your jacket, and step into a small room lit by a single lamp that flickers like it is uncertain it wants to participate. The heat hits you first, the cabbage hits you second, and then you see her. She sits at the center of the cramped space, like a queen perched on a throne carved from mismatched furniture parts. Her chair lists slightly to the left, as if apologizing for its age, yet she sits perfectly upright, stirring a dented pot with a wooden spoon worn smooth by years of ambition. Her hair is tied in a loose knot, silver strands escaping in all directions like they have places to be. Her eyes, sharp and bright, lift toward you without surprise. She knows you came. She probably knew before you caught the scent. Around her, the room is a maze of baskets, jars, folded linens, and a few objects so unidentifiable you choose not to look directly at them. Everything hums with a quiet, steady purpose. You get the sense that nothing in this room has ever been lost, only relocated with intention. She gestures with her chin toward a stool that looks like it understands its own fragility. You sit carefully, trying to appear more coordinated than you feel. The old woman does not immediately speak. She continues stirring, letting the bubbling cabbage fill the silence. Outside the room, you hear footsteps, voices, and the clatter of something metal striking stone. But in here, the world feels strangely focused. When she finally speaks, her voice is smooth, steady, and threaded with amusement. She asks you where you wandered from, how long you have been in the alley, and what exactly you think you are looking for. You answer truthfully, or at least you try to. She watches you with the kind of expression that suggests she already knows the parts you hesitate over. Then the conversation shifts. She tells you who argued this morning and why, who nearly set their kitchen on fire last night, who is pretending they did not break the water barrel, who is hiding a fresh romance like it is a prized treasure. Every detail comes out in a calm stream, delivered with no judgment and no sense of hurry. The pot continues to bubble beside her, keeping time with her words. You realize you are sitting in the heart of the alley's information web, and the woman stirring cabbage is its quiet mastermind. She does not whisper. She does not lean in conspiratorially. She simply speaks, weaving each tiny thread of knowledge into a tapestry she seems to maintain for no reason other than she cares about how all the pieces fit together. When you finally stand to leave, she gives you a slow nod, as if confirming that you have been properly introduced to the alley's unofficial council. You step back into the corridor, carrying the weight of her stories and the lingering aroma of cabbage that will follow you for at least the next several hours. You start noticing it almost immediately, the way the alley stretches everything it touches. Food, space, hours in the day, even patience. Nothing here is used once and discarded. Everything earns its keep. You see it first in the hands of a woman crouched beside a crate, slicing a carrot so thin you can almost see through it. She arranges the pieces like precious tiles in a pot that already smells like it has lived several previous lives. She does not waste a sliver. Even the greens go into a jar for later. destined to become a broth so lean it might technically qualify as flavored water. But everyone will praise it as hearty. Across from her, a man kneads dough on a board, balanced across his knees. He stretches it farther than you thought dough could physically stretch without staging a rebellion. He sprinkles flour with such thrift that each handful feels ceremonial. When he is done, he tucks the dough into a pan, barely big enough to hold it, and nods with the satisfaction of someone who has coaxed a miracle out of almost nothing. A child nearby watches intently, memorizing the process as if studying for an exam. Life will grade with no mercy. The same creativity extends to space. Every square inch is negotiated, traded, or borrowed. A stoop becomes a dining table. A window ledge transforms into a pantry. One family has built a sleeping nook above their door frame, wedged in with planks and blankets, and the youngest child climbs into it each night like a cat disappearing onto a bookshelf. Another group pulls out folding stools from under a tarp and arranges them with the precision of a stage crew preparing for a show. You pass a man who proudly gestures toward a narrow gap between two crates where he claims he can fit, sleep, and store his tools. You believe him, and also silently hope he never snores. Time, too, is stretched to its limit. People rise before dawn, because dawn does not wait for anyone with no room to spare. Work begins early, whether that means mending clothes, scrubbing floors, or hurrying to the markets where the best bargains appear before the rest of the city rubs its eyes. You watch a woman stir a pot with one hand while sewing with the other, her foot rocking a cradle in a smooth rhythm she no longer consciously controls. Conversations happen while chopping vegetables, repairing shoes, or sweeping the walkway. Everyone multitasks because the day is never long enough, and if you fall behind, the alley doesn't bother slowing down for you. What surprises you is the humor that threads through all of it. A man jokes that his stew is so thin he needs a magnifying glass to find it. A grandmother scolds a teenager for stealing bread, then hands him a second piece with a wink because he is still growing. Even the people who have the least seem to find ways to laugh. Maybe because laughter is one of the few things that does not need to be rationed. You see resourcefulness everywhere you turn. Soap is shaved into flakes to last longer. Old shirts become rags, which become patches, which become stuffing for cushions. A cracked bowl is repaired with wire, then decorated so carefully that the flaw becomes its charm. The residents treat scarcity the way some treat a puzzle, testing how many times they can reshape the same shabby thing into something useful. And somehow, the alley rewards their effort by giving each object a second, third, and fourth life. By the time you step around a line of drying herbs strung between two crooked beams, you start to understand something. Survival here is not a single act, but a constant weaving of small improvisations. It is the art of making almost nothing stretch far enough to fill a day, then doing it again tomorrow. And as you watch them, you realize that the city may not know they exist, but they know each other. And that is what keeps them going. Night settles over the alley like a heavy blanket someone forgot to wash, thick with the smell of coal smoke and the faint sting of spilled gin. You think the place might finally quiet down, but Double Alley never really sleeps. It only shifts moods, and tonight it shifts fast. You hear it before you see it. The sharp crack of a voice that snaps through the cramped walls, followed by the scrape of a crate being kicked aside. People stop what they are doing, but only for a moment. The way someone pauses when they hear thunder, but keeps walking because storms are nothing new. You turn a corner and find a knot of bodies, already forming a loose circle. Two men stand at the center, chests puffed, each looking like he has been waiting all day for something to punch. One accuses the other of stealing a loaf of bread. The other claims the loaf was abandoned, which you suspect is a very flexible interpretation of the word abandoned. Their argument grows louder, building like steam trapped in a kettle. You can feel the tension climb up your spine as onlookers shift, whisper, and calculate whether stepping back or staying close will keep them safer. Space in the alley is scarce, and tempers grow like weeds in the cracks. It does not take long before one man shoves the other with the kind of force that suggests he has been rehearsing the move in his head for hours. The crowd reacts instantly, some leaning in with morbid curiosity, others raising hands to shield children behind them. The first punch lands hard enough to echo, bouncing off the walls and slipping down the narrow corridor behind you. The man who gets hit stumbles but recovers quickly, swinging back with the desperate speed of someone who cannot afford to lose anything else today. The fight becomes a flurry of fists, curses, and wild lunges. One trips over a bucket and nearly falls into a stack of firewood, sending splinters scattering like startled insects. Someone shouts for them to stop, but the plea dissolves into the noise. Another voice yells odds as if this is entertainment, though even he flinches when one of the fighters slams against a wall hard enough to shake loose a cloud of dust. Despite the chaos, there is a strange choreography to the way the crowd moves. People close in when they think they can break it up, then draw back when a punch swings too wide. A woman steps forward with both hands raised, but the men are too locked in their fury to notice her. You see neighbors exchanging quick glances, silently debating whether they should intervene or wait for the storm to run out of strength. Fights like this are dangerous, but so is stepping into one at the wrong moment. It ends the way many alley brawls do, not with a dramatic finale but with exhaustion. One fighter slips on the wet stones, hitting the ground with a thud that squeezes the air from his lungs. The other stands over him, panting, fist raised but trembling with the weight of the day. For a long second, everything holds still. Then he lets his arm fall. The crowd releases a collective breath, and the air shifts from electric to weary. Neighbors separate the men, muttering scoldings mixed with sympathy. Someone brings water. Someone else retrieves the dented loaf of bread that caused all this trouble and divides it into pieces small enough to keep anyone from fighting over them again. The alley exhales, settling back into its usual rhythm, though a few people keep glancing over their shoulders to make sure the quiet is not temporary. As you walk away, you realize how thin the line is here between survival and eruption. In a place where space is too tight and resources too few, conflict grows quickly, but so does the instinct to pull each other back from the edge. You duck beneath the first laundry line because you have no interest in leaving with a face full of someone's damp shirt. The cloth brushes the top of your head anyway, leaving a cold stripe of moisture that feels like the alley's personal welcome. Above you hangs a sprawling canopy of garments in every shape and fabric, swaying gently like a collection of ghosts airing their grievances. What little daylight reaches double alley filters through sleeves, trousers, and petticoats, tinting everything in shades of cloth that have seen better centuries. If the sun could speak, it would probably file a formal complaint. You move forward carefully, because the laundry lines do not behave like normal string. These lines have ambition. They crisscross over your head, stretch low at unpredictable points, and dip so sharply that you start to wonder if someone tied them specifically to test a stranger's balance. A pair of stockings dangles directly in your path, spinning slowly with the smugness of obstacles that know you cannot avoid them. You shift sideways, and instantly, a dripping hem from above taps your shoulder like a scolding finger. The rooftops above you are no better. They lean inward, sloping with the weary posture of buildings that have carried far too many winters. Water trickles down from their edges in thin streams, dripping onto the stones with steady plinks that echo through the tight walls. Every few steps you hear a louder drip, the kind that splashes with unnecessary enthusiasm, and you instinctively check to make sure it is not landing in your hair. A few residents set out basins to catch the runoff, and each container produces its own little rhythm. Together, the alley sounds like a choir of leaky pipes practicing scales. You weave under a particularly low bundle of freshly washed linens and inhale a scent that is part soap and part something no soap should ever try to fix. A woman from an upper window calls down to shoo you aside as she wrings out a huge blanket with the confidence of someone who has impeccable aim. The water arcs down and misses you by inches, splattering against the stones. She smirks, not in a cruel way, but in the way someone does, when they know they almost demonstrated their accuracy. Children race through the maze of hanging garments, playing a game that seems to involve ducking, chasing, and occasionally pretending the laundry is a forest of enchanted fabric. You nearly collide with one who slides out from under a sagging line with the agility of a street cat. He shoots you a grin, then disappears back into the maze before you have a chance to ask him where the safe path is, not that there is one. As you continue, you notice how the light shifts constantly. One moment you walk through a dim tunnel of overlapping shirts. The next you step into a streak of sunlight so sharp it feels blinding. The alley never lets you forget it controls the lighting. The rooftops form a jagged crown overhead, blocking the sky except for narrow wedges where clouds drift past like distant visitors who want nothing to do with this place. When the wind picks up, the garments above you ripple and twist, creating moving shadows that dance on the walls in ways both beautiful and slightly unnerving. You crouch under one last heavy line where a massive quilt hangs like a great wall, dripping steadily at its corners. When you emerge on the other side, you feel oddly victorious, as if you survived a small trial designed to test your patience and posture. The residents move through this tangle with practiced ease, slipping beneath lines and dodging drips without ever breaking stride. You realize you are the only one wobbling and blinking through wayward sleeves like a confused traveler with no map. By the time you reach a wider stretch of stone, you look back and see the laundry canopy filling the alley behind you, shifting and whispering in the wind. It is chaotic, inconvenient, and constantly damp, but somehow it is also the heartbeat of the place, turning scraps of cloth and leaking rooftops into a tapestry that keeps the alley alive. You notice them before you truly see them, small shapes flickering along the edges of your vision, like they are stitched into the shadows themselves. At first you think they are tricks of the dim light, but then one darts across the path so fast you nearly stumble. The alley children move with a kind of unbothered mastery that makes you feel like an intruder in a world where they reign supreme. They slip between hanging laundry, hop over puddles, and weave around adults with the ease of creatures born for tight spaces and quick escapes. One girl appears beside you without a sound, her feet bare and her hair tied back with a ribbon that looks like it has survived at least 3 generations. She studies you with calm curiosity, then vanishes behind a stack of crates before you can greet her. Her footsteps make no noise at all. The only sign she was ever there is the faint sway of a nearby laundry line, as if marking her exit. A group of boys chases each other along the narrow walkway, their laughter echoing sharply between the leaning walls. They dodge every obstacle, effortlessly, leaping over a bucket, slipping under a stray beam, and skirting a suspicious puddle that you gave a wide berth earlier. One of them skids to a stop when he spots a loose coin someone dropped. He pockets it with triumphant speed, then sprints off before anyone has time to ask where he found it. You get the sense these children do not waste opportunities, no matter how small. Their games are not really games, at least not entirely. Every playful sprint doubles as practice. Every dare is training. You watch a girl balance along a wooden plank propped between 2 windows, arms outstretched, eyes steady. A boy climbs a drain pipe with such grace it feels less like climbing and more like rising. You can tell that the alley teaches them to move quickly, or not at all, to see danger before it sees them, and to turn every scrap of space into a path. A toddler waddles toward a stack of crates and nearly topples a pile of laundry baskets. But before disaster strikes, an older child swoops in, scoops him up, and redirects him without breaking stride. The toddler squeals in delight, as though this was part of the plan all along. It seems the alley children operate with collective awareness, each one acting as lookout, courier, and rescuer, depending on the moment. You try walking at their pace for a stretch, but it becomes clear almost immediately that you lack the necessary instincts. You hesitate where they flow. You pause where they slip through unthinking. When a group darts past you, you instinctively brace yourself, but they simply bend around you like water around a stone. One boy pats your arm sympathetically before streaking off again, as if to say that not everyone can be cut from alley cloth. They are mischievous, of course. You catch a girl sneaking up behind a sleeping dog to braid ribbons into its fur. A boy hides behind a rain barrel and startles his friend so effectively that even you flinch. Someone whistles from a rooftop, and 3 children scatter instantly, their pockets suspiciously full of something that rattles. You do not want to know what it is, but beneath all their tricks and teasing, you sense an unspoken order. They watch for patrols. They warn each other of drunks stumbling through the passage. They guide lost younger ones out of dangerous corners with gentle nudges. They know which doors are safe to knock on and which rooftops are too weak to trust. The alley may be cramped and unpredictable, but they read it like a familiar book. When one small girl appears at your side again, tugging lightly at your sleeve, she simply points toward a safer path ahead before melting back into the shadows. You follow her silent advice, realizing she probably saved you from a slippery stone or low beam. In this cramped world, the children move like ghosts, but ghosts with purpose, intent, and sharp eyes that miss nothing. As you move on, you feel them watching, not out of suspicion but out of curiosity, as if deciding whether you might one day learn to move through the alley with even a fraction of their quiet skill. You begin to sense it before you fully understand it, a subtle shift in the air as you turn a corner and step into a pocket of the alley that feels different from the rest. The sounds change first. Voices blend in a dozen accents, weaving together in a rhythm that feels older and steadier than the city outside these walls. The scent changes too. Instead of the usual stew and coal smoke, you catch hints of spices, herbs, and something sweet baking in a small clay oven, someone wedged between 2 crates. It becomes clear that people have carved out small worlds inside this narrow place, each shaped by the lands they left behind. You pass a group of women sitting on low stools, their hands moving quickly as they braid dough and tuck it into a pot to rise. They speak softly in a language full of round vowels and warm cadence. One of them glances up and offers you a smile that surprises you with its gentleness. She gestures toward the pot, then taps her chest proudly, as if to say this recipe has survived oceans and governments and will survive this alley too. You nod back, feeling something settle inside you, a quiet understanding that food here is more than nourishment. It is memory. Farther down, men gather around a crate turned into a game board, sketched with lines and symbols you do not recognize, but which they clearly take very seriously. They argue in hushed tones, leaning in, clapping each other's backs, and laughing when someone makes a particularly clever move. Their clothes are patched but carefully maintained, and every gesture carries the familiarity of people who have known each other since childhood, long before the alley squeezed them into these cramped circumstances. One of them waves at you to join, but you shake your head quickly, knowing you would be lost before your first turn. He laughs knowingly and returns to the game. The micro communities fit together like mismatched puzzle pieces, each keeping its identity alive with rituals so small they could be missed if you did not look closely. Children sing counting rhymes from their parents' homelands, the melodies bouncing through the brick passageways. A grandmother hangs embroidered cloth over her doorway, turning her tiny room into a burst of color in a place made mostly of gray. A man lights a candle on a windowsill at dusk, murmuring a prayer you cannot quite hear, yet you feel its weight anyway. You wander into another section where families prepare a communal meal, each contributing something small. A bit of rice, a handful of chopped vegetables, a pinch of spice saved from last season. The pot grows slowly, fed by many hands, and soon a warm, fragrant cloud drifts through the air. People gather around it not just for food, but for the comfort of standing among their own. They talk about relatives far away, about festivals they used to celebrate, about songs they refuse to forget even if the alley swallows the sound. In one corner, a tiny group has arranged a makeshift shrine with candles melted into bottles, a few carefully placed stones, and a piece of cloth folded with reverence. They bow their heads, whisper prayers, and touch the stones as if sending their words across an ocean. Even the children quiet down when they pass, sensing that this is a place where you tread lightly. What you notice most is how each community protects its space, not with fences or harsh words, but with small acts of care. Someone sweeps the walkway. Someone else keeps a kettle warm for late arrivals. Another keeps watch from a window, eyes sharp but kind. These pockets of familiarity hold people together, offering them a sense of place in a city that barely acknowledges their existence. As you continue deeper, you realize the alley is not one world but many, stitched together by the people who carry their histories like lanterns in the dark. You feel the warmth of their stories, even as you move on, knowing you have brushed against something fragile and fiercely resilient, something that has taken root in the narrowest spaces and refused to disappear. You notice the workshop first by its sound, a steady clinking that suggests someone is either hammering metal or enthusiastically ruining it. The sign above the crooked doorway claims repairs of all kinds, but the letter R is faded, and the word repairs looks more like repeats, which feels unintentionally accurate. You step closer, thinking you might see someone fixing hinges or sharpening tools. But the moment you cross the threshold, the air shifts. The scent of oil and sawdust is there, yes, but it floats beneath another smell entirely, something sharp and restless, like anticipation wearing a thin grin. Inside, scraps of wood and metal lie scattered in places clearly chosen to create the illusion of work. Broken chairs lean in corners. Half-assembled contraptions gather dust on shelves. In the center sits a wide table, covered not with tools, but with cards, dice, and a small mountain of mismatched coins. A group of men and women hunch over it, their eyes bright, their hands twitching with barely restrained energy. They do not look up when you enter. They are too focused on the table, as if expecting the wood itself to betray them with a sudden shift. The dealer, a man with a mustache so elaborate it should have its own mailing address, flicks cards across the table with smooth precision. He never breaks eye contact with his players. His hands move so quickly the lantern light barely catches the motion. You watch a young man slide forward a pile of coins that might represent months of careful saving. His foot taps under the table, too fast to be accidental. The dealer lifts a brow, deals one more card, and the young man's shoulders slump as if someone removed all the bones from his body. His fortune dissolves in seconds, scattered into the pockets of strangers. You linger near a set of shelves stacked with bent nails and half-carved handles, pretending to inspect them while you observe the real activity. Another player leans in, whispering to the woman beside him as he weighs a set of dice in his palm. They look ordinary enough, but the way he studies them makes you think they have a history. He rolls them anyway. They clatter across the table, bounce against a tin cup, and land in a way that makes the entire room exhale. He wins, but only for a moment. The woman at his side nudges him sharply, reminding him silently not to get too confident. A man near the corner curses under his breath as he loses another round, his face reddening as he digs through his coat pockets. He produces a pocket watch, tarnished but intact, and places it on the table with the tenderness of someone setting down a family heirloom. It lasts 2 turns, 3 at most, before it disappears into the dealer's growing collection of surrendered dreams. The man slumps back in his chair, staring at the spot where the watch used to be. The room hums with a tension that is part excitement, part desperation. You can feel the pull of it, the way the table draws people in like a quiet whirlpool. The stakes shift constantly. Some players walk away with smiles that barely fit their faces. Others walk away hollowed out, clutching nothing but empty pockets and shaky breaths. You realize that this place has perfected the art of looking like a workshop while functioning as something far more dangerous. Anyone passing by would hear the occasional thump or clink and assume tools are in use. They are, in a way, but these tools carve futures instead of furniture, As you slip back toward the doorway, a woman catches your eye. She gestures subtly, as if warning you that watching too long is its own kind of gamble. You nod and step out into the alley, feeling the air lighten the moment the door shuts behind you. The noise fades into a muffled murmur, but you can still sense the rise and fall of hope inside, spinning as unpredictably as the dice that decide so many fates in that disguised little den. You notice the stillness first, a pause so unusual that it makes you stop mid-step. Double Alley never offers silence freely, yet here it is, settling around you like a blanket someone has finally remembered to shake out. The usual clatter of pots, arguments drifting from windows, and children darting underfoot has softened into a distant murmur. Even the laundry above you hangs motionless, as if the wind has decided to take a break. For the first time since you entered this place, you can hear your own footsteps without competition. A thin ribbon of steam rises from a grate beside you, curling upward in lazy spirals. It has no hurry, no urgency, just a quiet insistence on existing. The warmth of it brushes your hand, damp and almost gentle, carrying the faint scent of metal and old earth. More plumes rise farther down the alley, forming pale columns that catch what little light filters through the rooftops. They move like slow breathing, exhalations from the hidden machinery beneath the city, as if the world below has finally decided to join the living for a moment. You take a few steps forward, and the stones beneath your boots feel different, warmer, as though the steam is seeping through them. The familiar clutter of the alley seems softer too. Crates sit in their usual lopsided positions, but they no longer look like obstacles. Buckets line the walls, but no one is rushing to fill them. A broom leans against a doorframe, abandoned mid-chore, suggesting that someone paused to enjoy this rare quiet and never returned to their task. Everything seems suspended. A cat strolls past you with an air of ownership so complete that you step aside instinctively. It stretches, yawns, and wanders through a cloud of steam as if performing a slow entrance on a stage. Its fur catches the diffused light, turning silver for a heartbeat. You follow its path until it disappears under a curtain of hanging shirts that sway just slightly, the only movement in the still air. A window creaks open above you, not with the sharp snap you usually hear, but with a soft groan. An older man leans out, resting his elbows on the sill. He looks over the alley with the expression of someone who has lived here long enough to recognize when the place gifts him something rare. He nods at you, a quiet acknowledgement shared between two people witnessing an unusual moment. You nod back, unsure if speaking would break the spell. The air feels thicker, almost velvety. You inhale deeply, and the steam warms your lungs. You can hear the faint hum of something deep below, maybe pipes or distant engines. Maybe the city's hidden heartbeat. The walls around you seem less oppressive, their leaning silhouettes softer in the diffused glow. Even the usual smell of cabbage and coal smoke has mellowed into something less confrontational. For a moment, you imagine the whole of New York inhaling and exhaling with you, the city's breath rising through the vents and drifting along the alley like a shared sigh. The chaos is still there, tucked into corners and waiting for its cue. But now it rests. You rest with it, just long enough to feel what the alley might be without the constant press of survival. Then, somewhere in the distance, a pot lid clatters and a child laughs sharply. The spell loosens, the world stirs, but the steam keeps rising, slow and steady, reminding you that even the most crowded corners of this place hold pockets of quiet, moments where the alley breathes and invites you to breathe with it. You hear them before you see them, the thud of heavy boots striking stone in a rhythm too controlled to belong to anyone who lives here. The alley's usual murmur tightens into something sharper, a tension that crawls along the walls and settles on your shoulders. People withdraw without speaking. Curtains shift, doors close with careful hands. Even the children who dart around fearlessly all day vanish into cracks and corners like they were never there. You feel the alley pull back, as if bracing itself for weather no one asked for. You round the bend and spot them entering from the far end, a small group moving with the confidence of men who believe the space belongs to them. They carry themselves like sharpened edges, shoulders squared, eyes scanning every direction with practiced calculation. These are not residents. These are the ones who treat Double Alley like a shortcut, a twisting corridor where they can slip between neighborhoods unseen and like a hunting ground, where anyone unlucky enough to cross their path becomes entertainment or opportunity. The leader walks in front, a tall man with a coat that swings behind him like he enjoys the dramatic effect. His gaze sweeps across the alley, not curious, not cautious, just claiming. Behind him, two younger men mutter to each other, nudging crates with their boots and smirking as they look for reactions. They are the kind of men who enjoy making the world flinch. You see the residents watching from hidden vantage points, each face tight, each body motionless, their silence held like breath. The leader stops when he notices an old man sitting at a low table near a doorway. The man was sorting through scraps of cloth a moment ago, but his hands freeze the instant the gang blocks his light. The leader tilts his head, his smile unfriendly in the way that always comes before trouble. He asks a question you cannot quite hear, but whatever it is not a request. The old man answers quietly, his voice steady but small. You feel the shift in the air as the leader steps closer. One of the younger gang members kicks the table leg, sending cloth pieces scattering across the stones. The old man bends to gather them, but his movements are too slow for the impatient grin forming on the gang member's face. Before the young man can do anything worse, a woman steps forward from a nearby doorway. She is small, but she stands straight, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. She speaks firmly, her tone sharp enough to draw the leader's attention. Her words are simple, a warning, a boundary, an insistence that this is not the place for whatever spectacle they came to create. The leader turns toward her, amused. He steps closer, testing how far he can push before something breaks. You can feel the alley tightening around you, waiting to see if she stands her ground or if the men behind her will start something everyone will feel the cost of. The woman does not move. Her eyes remain fixed on his, unwavering. It is a battle fought in silence first, the kind where pride and fear fight for space behind rib cages. The gang member who kicked the table tries to step forward again, but the leader raises a hand to stop him. Something in the woman's expression has made him reevaluate the moment. Maybe it is the stillness of the alley, the watching eyes, or the unspoken promise that any harm done here will not go unanswered. He glances around and seems to notice what you see clearly now. The alley may bend, but it never bends alone. He makes a show of stepping back, flashing a grin that pretends the whole thing was entertainment. His men follow, though with far less bravado than when they arrived. They leave the way they came, boots pounding out a rhythm that grows softer with each step until the alley claims its quiet again. When they are gone, the residents re-emerge, not with cheers or relief, but with calm efficiency. The woman returns to her doorway. The old man gathers his cloth, slower now, but with help from two neighbors who appear at his side. A child peeks out from behind a barrel and resumes breathing. The alley exhales, and so do you, realizing only now how long you held your breath. You begin to sense the nighttime economy before you fully understand what you are walking into. The alley feels different after dark, not quieter exactly, but tuned to another frequency. Lanterns glow behind curtains and through cracks in shutters, thin streams of light stretching across the stones like secret invitations. You hear soft footsteps that do not match the usual hurried pace of residents trying to get home. These steps belong to people who thrive in the hours when the city pretends to sleep. As you move deeper, the scents shift. Cooked cabbage and coal smoke give way to something sharper, the faint tang of metal mixed with oils and old leather. A crate scrapes lightly across the ground ahead of you, guided by a man whose eyes never stop scanning the shadows. He lifts the lid just enough to peek inside, then closes it again with the delicacy someone usually reserves for items that are fragile, expensive, or incriminating. He vanishes into a doorway without a word, leaving you to wonder what sort of treasures or troubles travel in such boxes. More figures gather in a narrow side corridor, each carrying small bundles wrapped in cloth. They greet each other in whispers, heads bent together as they compare whatever objects they have brought. A woman unwraps a silver candlestick, polished well enough to catch the lantern light even through the dim. Another holds out a stack of books so worn at the edges they look rescued from a fire rather than a shelf. A third reveals a collection of tools, none matching, all suspiciously new. Every item is examined with practiced eyes, passed from hand to hand, weighed not for beauty but for value measured in meals, warmth, and favors owed. A thin man with sharp cheekbones oversees the trading, his ledger nothing more than a scrap of paper tucked behind his ear. He seems to track every transaction through sheer memory, nodding when a deal pleases him and frowning when someone tries to bargain too boldly. People defer to him with the ease of long habit. You get the feeling his word holds more power in these hours than any official stationed above ground. Movement catches your eye as two children slip from behind a stack of crates carrying something wrapped tightly in burlap. They look too calm for kids sneaking out after dark, and you soon understand why. They approach a woman leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, and her posture impatient. She takes the bundle, unwraps it, and reveals half a dozen tin cups engraved with a symbol you do not recognize. She pays them with a few small coins and a warm roll pulled from her coat pocket. The children split their reward and disappear down the alley with a speed that suggests they have more deliveries ahead. You watch as goods change hands with astonishing efficiency. A pocket watch passes from one man to another, and by the time it reaches a third, it already looks polished. A pair of boots appears suddenly in a trader's arms and is gone again less than a minute later. A wooden box, carefully sealed and clutched protectively, makes a full circuit of the alley before landing with someone who cradles it like a newborn. No one asks aloud where these things originated. The rule here is simple. If you are foolish enough to ask questions, you are too foolish to be included. What surprises you most is how quickly the alley rearranges itself to accommodate this hidden market. Crates shift into tables with the scrape of wood on stone. A blanket becomes a stage for displaying trinkets. A shutter left slightly open becomes a lookout point. Everything transforms to serve the purpose of temporary commerce, then slips back into ordinary clutter before sunrise wipes the night clean again. As you leave the heart of the exchange behind, you glance back once. Already, the figures are dispersing into shadows, goods tucked away, whispers fading. By morning, no trace will remain except perhaps a missing cup, a replaced tool, or a curtain drawn closed, a little tighter than usual. The alley will look the same as it did before, but you know better now. Beneath the daylight routines lies a careful, restless economy that thrives in darkness, trading in objects that carry stories the sun is not meant to see. You notice the repairs first, by the sound, a steady rhythm of tapping, scraping, and low muttering that suggests both determination and a deep, ongoing negotiation with gravity. Everywhere you look, someone is fixing something, often with materials that should not reasonably function but somehow do. A young man balances on a crate that wobbles like it is reconsidering its commitment to being a crate, tying together two splintered beams with rope frayed enough to have lived several past lives. He pulls the knot tight, leans back to test it, and nods with the satisfaction of a master craftsman who has just performed a miracle using the leftovers from someone else's leftovers. Farther down the alley, a woman kneels beside a cracked water basin, patching the leak with a mixture of cloth scraps and a glue she made herself from. Ingredients she claims are harmless, but smells suspiciously like a failed experiment. She smooths the patch with the seriousness of a surgeon, taps it twice as if sealing a promise, and then fills the basin slowly. You both watch the water rise. The patch holds, and she beams at it as though she has just outwitted the universe. A group of children drags a broken cart to the center of the passage, chattering excitedly about their plan to fix it. The cart's wheels are so lopsided that simply touching one sends the entire structure leaning dangerously. The children do not seem worried. They gather bits of metal, discarded nails, and what may be part of an old chair leg. One child, clearly the designated engineer, taps the wheel hub thoughtfully with a spoon before declaring they need more rope. Within seconds, two of them sprint off and return with a handful of string that looks barely strong enough to tie a shoelace. But somehow, under their combined effort, the cart begins to resemble something functional again. Near a doorway, an older man repairs a broken shutter using nothing but a rusted hinge and pure stubbornness. He mutters at the wood, as though convincing it to behave is part of the process. When the hinge refuses to sit properly, he adjusts the angle slightly, nudges the wood into place, and tightens the screws with a tool that might once have been a screwdriver but now looks more like a suggestion of one. Eventually the shutter swings smoothly, and he gives it an approving pat. Even the rooftops are home to repairs that defy logic. You watch a woman shimmy along a narrow beam, repairing a portion of the roof with shingles made from flattened tin scraps. Each piece reflects the light differently, giving the roof a patchwork shine that flickers like scales on a strange creature. She hammers the tin into place with a rhythm so steady it almost becomes music. What stands out most is the attitude behind every repair. There is no despair, no complaint, only determination wrapped in humor. Someone jokes that the alley itself is held together by rope and wishes, and someone else replies that wishes are expensive these days, so they use rope more often. They say it lightly, but you sense the truth beneath the laughter. These repairs are acts of survival disguised as everyday tasks. As you walk through the alley, you see the results everywhere. A door patched with 3 different types of wood, but still swinging reliably. A gutter fixed with a bent metal cup that now channels water perfectly. A stool braced with a piece of driftwood that somehow adds charm rather than awkwardness. Nothing matches, nothing is perfect, yet nothing is abandoned. You realize that every repair is a quiet declaration that the residents refuse to let the alley swallow them. They rebuild what breaks. They repurpose what others throw away. They coax stubborn materials into cooperation, reminding them that usefulness is not a fixed state, but something that can be reinvented with enough patience and rope. By the time you leave this stretch of the alley, you find yourself looking differently at every crooked beam and patched wall. Instead of seeing dilapidation, you see persistence, stitched into the place by hands that refuse to stop trying. You notice the smell long before you see anything, a heavy, unmistakable reminder that the alley's relationship with sanitation is more a negotiation than a system. It clings to the air in layers, shifting between sour dampness and something sharper that suggests someone gave up on proper disposal a long time ago. Still, curiosity pulls you forward, and soon you find yourself following a thin trickle of water weaving through the stones like it is searching for an escape route. The wastewater slinks along the path with the confidence of something that has traveled this route every day for years. It curves around loose bricks, slips under sagging boards, and gathers in shallow dips before continuing onward, carrying bits of the alley's daily life with it. You brace yourself as you step carefully around it, but at some point you realize that around is more a hopeful idea than a realistic plan. A woman crouches beside a cracked pipe, poking at it with a stick that has clearly been appointed her official inspection tool. She mutters observations to herself and occasionally nods as if taking mental notes. The pipe burps weakly, releasing another wave of murky water that joins the flow. She responds by stuffing cloth into the gap, not to repair it exactly, but to coax it into leaking more politely. When she spots you watching, she shrugs and says the pipe has a personality and must be handled gently or it throws tantrums. You believe her. Further along, you find residents working together on a drainage trench they maintain with grim pride. It is a narrow groove dug between the stones, not quite straight but functional. A man uses a bent piece of metal as a scoop, clearing debris with the seriousness of someone tending a garden. A younger girl kneels beside him, using a twig to dislodge stubborn clumps that refuse to budge. They work in comfortable silence, pausing only when a passing bucket of dishwater empties into the trench with a splash that makes them both lean back instinctively. You keep following the flow until you reach a section where ingenuity turns into something almost impressive. Someone has fashioned a series of tilted boards to guide the wastewater around living spaces and into a single direction. The boards look like they were scavenged from broken furniture, but they are arranged with surprising precision. The water rolls over them obediently, forming small waterfalls that gurgle with unsettling cheerfulness. A boy appears from behind a pile of crates, adjusting one of the boards until the flow straightens, then nods proudly at his handiwork. At one point, the path leads you past a wooden bucket positioned under an embedded, overhanging gutter. The bucket catches, drips from above, each plunk echoing dully. Next to it sits another bucket filled with soapy water that someone is using to wash clothes. The woman scrubbing them explains that you use clean water to wash, but you rinse with whatever trickles down. Her tone suggests that questioning this logic would mark you instantly as someone who has never lived here. The wastewater eventually funnels into a larger trough made of stones held together by a mixture of mud, hope, and a binding agent no one will admit to inventing. From there, it disappears into a grate that looks far too small for the volume it handles. Yet somehow the grate manages, groaning only occasionally when the flow becomes too enthusiastic. As you stand there, watching the murky stream vanish into the dark below, you realize that the alley's sanitation is not a system designed by planners or engineers. It is an ongoing conversation between necessity and invention, shaped daily by people who refuse to let the alley drown them. It is grim, yes, and unpleasant, undeniably, but it is also resourceful, stubborn, and strangely impressive. In Double Alley, even wastewater learns to navigate survival. You notice him because he moves with the kind of tired precision that only comes from routine carved over years. He steps out of a doorway so narrow you wonder how anyone fits inside, adjusting the frayed collar of a shirt that has been patched so many times it carries a history of its own. You do not know his name yet, but you recognize immediately that he belongs to this place in a way you do not. The alley has shaped him, smoothed some parts and sharpened others, leaving behind a person built entirely out of survival and stubbornness. He walks with a limp that seems mild until he pauses to stretch his leg. You think perhaps it is an old injury, the kind no doctor ever treated properly. He does not linger on it. He simply rolls his weight forward again and keeps moving, weaving through crates and puddles like someone who has memorized every obstacle. He nods to a woman sweeping her doorway, to a child perched on a stoop, to an older man repairing a broken frame. Each nod carries a different weight, a silent greeting tailored for each person. You realize quickly that he has connections here, strands of familiarity that tie him to everyone around him. You follow at a respectful distance, watching as he begins his morning ritual. He exchanges a small bundle of twine for a scrap of bread from a vendor who sets up early. Then he carries the bread to a family with 3 young children and leaves half of it on their doorstep before they wake. He does not knock or wait for thanks. He simply places it down and walks on. The gesture is quiet and practiced. You have the sense he has been doing this for years. As the alley stirs to life, more people emerge. He greets them with the calm assurance of someone who learned long ago that the only real wealth here is how you treat the people trapped beside you. A group of boys tries to show him a broken toy cart, and he crouches to inspect it despite the stiffness in his leg. He tightens one of the wheels with a strip of wire pulled from his pocket, tests it, and hands it back to them. Their cheers follow him down the path. Eventually, he stops at a small workbench wedged between 2 leaning walls. It is his space. You can tell by the way his shoulders settle, by how his tools are arranged with pride even though none of them match. He begins to shape wood with careful strokes, shaving thin curls that fall to the ground like curled paper. The piece he works on is simple, but the focus on his face suggests it matters greatly. Maybe it is an order for a neighbor. Maybe it is something he repairs for the 100th time. The alley has taught him that usefulness is its own form of art. As the day goes on, you notice something else. People seek him out. A woman with a broken bucket handle. A man who needs help moving a crate. A child who simply wants to sit nearby and listen to the steady rasp of his tools. He answers each request with quiet patience. He never rushes, never complains, never gives the impression that he has anywhere more important to be. The alley has shaped his sense of time. It has taught him that rushing does not change anything, but consistency might. When the sun dips low, he returns to his doorway. You watch him pause at the threshold, hand resting on the frame as if feeling the shape of the home he has built within these narrow walls. His life has been molded by this place, not because he chose it, but because he learned to survive inside it. The alley has left marks on him, visible and invisible. But it has also given him a kind of purpose that only exists when people depend on one another for everything. As he disappears inside, you realize you have not simply observed his life. You have glimpsed how a place like Double Alley does not just shelter people. It shapes them, defines them, and in some quiet way, preserves them. You hear the alarm before you see anything, a sharp clang of metal against metal that vibrates through the alley like a jolt. It is not the dignified ringing of a bell tower. It is more like someone attacking a pan with a spoon, but the effect is instant. Windows fly open, doors bang against frames. People look up with the same expression, a mix of fear and practiced readiness. Fire is not an abstract danger here. Fire is a predator that knows every shortcut. You follow the direction of the noise and soon catch sight of the brigade rushing in. Calling them a brigade feels generous. They are a group of residents armed with buckets, wet cloths, and a hose that has clearly lived a hard life. Yet they move with unity and precision, weaving through the narrow passage with the speed of people who have rehearsed this scenario more times than they ever wanted to. Their faces are set with grim determination, the kind that strips away hesitation. In an alley built from wood and fabric and hope that frays easily, hesitation is the enemy. A thin curl of smoke rises from a second-floor window, bleeding into the dim light with unsettling elegance. It is small now, almost delicate, but everyone knows how fast it can change. The brigade spreads out instantly. Two people rush up a ladder so rickety it looks offended by the weight, while others form a bucket line that operates with impressive efficiency. Water sloshes, splashes, and occasionally misses its intended target, but the rhythm is steady. You step aside as a bucket is passed down the line with the careful urgency of someone handing off a sleeping infant. The flames appear a moment later, licking the edges of the window frame like they are testing their appetite. Heat pulses outward, sharper than you expect, enough to send you stumbling back. You wonder how anyone fights something that moves this fast, this unpredictably, in a place where every doorway is a trap and every rooftop leans too close. The brigade knows how. They smother the flames with soaked cloths, douse the frame with more water, and shout instructions over the crackle. Their movements are messy but purposeful, shaped by necessity rather than technique. A man at the front of the line tosses a final bucket upward, and the water cascades over the frame with a hiss loud enough to make the flames shrink back. The smoke thickens, swirling into the air like a cornered creature. Someone at your side coughs, pulling a kerchief over their mouth, eyes watering. You do the same, tasting the sting of charred wood on the back of your tongue. The fire begins to lose its strength, shrinking to embers that glow like angry eyes. The brigade does not relax. They prod every beam, lift every cloth, check every corner as if expecting the flames to spring back from some hidden pocket. When they finally step away, the window frame looks scorched but intact, a victory in a place where survival is never guaranteed. As the crowd disperses, residents gather around the damaged home. They offer cloth, boards, and whatever tools they can spare. The brigade sets down their buckets, limbs trembling slightly now that the danger has passed. One of them wipes sweat and soot from his forehead, then lets out a shaky laugh, the kind that only comes after you outrun disaster by a few breaths. You stand there watching as the alley returns to its regular pulse. The fire has left its mark, a blackened outline against the wood, but the people move quickly to erase the evidence. They patch, reinforce, rebuild, and reassure, refusing to let the flames claim more than a few charred boards. In a place with so little room to lose, fire is a monster everyone knows intimately. Yet somehow, through teamwork, instinct, and sheer refusal to surrender, the alley fights back every time. You hear the music before you spot the musicians, faint notes threading through the bricks like they are, searching for ears willing to listen. The melody drifts with surprising confidence, rising above the laundry lines and slipping between windows, cracked open just enough to let sound sneak through. It feels out of place at first, almost rebellious in a place weighed down by noise that usually comes from pots, arguments, or someone chasing a runaway chicken. Yet the music settles into the alley so naturally that you realize the place has been waiting for it. You follow the sound toward a cluster of crates where a man sits with a violin tucked under his chin. The instrument has seen better decades, its varnish cracked and faded, but the bow in his hand moves with the kind of tenderness that brings the wood back to life. The notes he draws out are warm and slightly raw, like emotion without polish. He closes his eyes as he plays, swaying gently with each phrase. A few people gather around him, some leaning against walls, others crouching on steps, each wearing an expression softened by memory or longing. Beside him, a young woman taps a small drum resting in her lap, her fingers moving with a rhythm that blends perfectly with the violin. She smiles when a child inches closer, tapping along on the cobblestones. Her beat shifts to match his clumsy attempts, encouraging him without a word. The boy's face lights up at the realization he is part of the music, and he taps with renewed enthusiasm, even if his timing wobbles like an unsteady stool. A man with a harmonica joins next, stepping out from a doorway like he has been waiting for his cue. He plays a line that curls around the violin melody, weaving harmony into the air. You notice how the sound changes the alley itself. The walls seem taller but less oppressive, the shadows softer. Even the cracked stones under your feet feel somehow warmer, as if the music has seeped into them. People begin to relax in ways you have not seen before. A woman who always sweeps her stoop with brisk, no-nonsense strokes sits down, for once, folding her hands in her lap as she listens. Two teenagers who had been arguing earlier now sit shoulder to shoulder, their expressions mellow as they lose themselves in the melody. An older man hums along, slightly off-key but completely unbothered by it. Someone starts singing, a low voice carrying words in a language you do not recognize. The tune swells in response, and soon others join, adding layers of harmony that lift the alley out of its usual heaviness. The song is not polished, but it feels honest, shaped by hardship, yet filled with defiance. The kind of defiance that insists joy is still allowed, even in places built from struggle. The musicians shift into a faster tune, bright and mischievous. Children dance in the cramped space, their feet slapping the stones with unrestrained abandon. One twirls until he becomes dizzy and stumbles into a pile of laundry, which sets off a burst of laughter from everyone watching. Even the laundry seems to approve, swaying gently as though moved by the beat. You find yourself smiling without meaning to, caught up in the current of sound and laughter. The music does not erase the difficulties of this place. It does not hide the hunger, the danger, or the tightness of the walls. But it offers something rare, a moment where people breathe together, where the alley feels less like a trap and more like a gathering place shaped by shared humanity. When the final note hangs in the air, lingering just a breath longer than expected, the crowd exhales softly. Conversations start again, but with lighter voices. Faces look a little brighter. The musicians pack up their battered instruments with the quiet satisfaction of people who know they have done something important, even if it will never earn them fame or coins. As they drift back into the folds of the alley, the melodies they played linger in your mind. You realize that in a place where hardship clings to every shadow, music becomes a kind of rebellion, a reminder that beauty still has room to exist here, stubborn and shining, echoing through bricks that have heard too much sorrow and welcome every note. You sense the tension before you understand the cause, an uneasy ripple moving through the alley, like a warning carried on breath instead of wind. People gather in small clusters, speaking in low voices, glancing toward a narrow doorway where the commotion grows louder. You inch closer until you see the landlord's men forcing their way inside, their boots too clean for this place, their expressions set with the indifference of people who do unpleasant tasks. So often they no longer register the humanity of those they affect. A woman stands in the doorway, blocking them as best she can. Her shoulders are squared, her chin high, but you can see the tremor in her hands. Behind her, a young boy clings to her skirt, eyes wide, watching everything with a silence far too old for him. The men push forward, announcing that the rent is overdue. Again, that patience has limits, that rules are rules. Their voices echo off the walls, too loud, too sharp, like they are trying to drown out the sound of their own cruelty. Neighbors try to intervene, stepping forward with pleas, offers, even small coins pooled together in shaking palms. The men ignore them. They lift the family's belongings with brisk efficiency, tossing them into the alley as if clearing debris instead of uprooting a life. A thin mattress, a pot with a cracked handle, a faded blanket, a handful of books wrapped in twine. The items land with soft thuds that sound heavier than they should. The boy starts gathering the scattered belongings, pressing them to his chest with a desperation that twists something deep inside you. The woman kneels beside him, guiding his hands, whispering to him in calm tones she does not truly feel. You can see it in her face, the strain of trying to shield him from a blow she cannot stop. She does not cry. She does not shout. The alley has taught her that noise rarely changes anything, but dignity sometimes does. The landlord's men finish quickly, slamming the door shut and locking it from the outside. The final click rings through the alley like the closing of a trap. Then they leave, footsteps fading into the distance, their job done, their conscience unbothered. The residents remain frozen for a moment, as if stunned by how swiftly a home can be erased. Then the shock breaks. People rush forward to help, gathering the scattered belongings, offering arms, blankets, stools to sit on, small comforts to hold the pieces together. A woman brings bread, another brings water. Someone offers a corner of their own cramped room for the night. A group of children collect every dropped item, even the ones that seem insignificant, as though restoring order might soften the blow. The woman accepts the help with quiet gratitude, but you can see how she keeps glancing at the locked door, her eyes tracing the shape of a home that no longer belongs to her. The boy sits on the mattress, now propped against a wall, his knees pulled to his chest. He does not cry either. He simply watches the door with the stillness of someone learning too young how loss works. The alley shifts around them. Conversations hush. People move carefully, their faces carrying the weight of knowing it could be any of them next time. Homes here are fragile, held together by rope, hope, and landlords who count coins but not people. As the woman gathers her things, preparing to follow the neighbor offering shelter, you realize the eviction has done more than displace a family. It has cracked something beneath the alley's foundation, a reminder that even the strongest sense of community cannot always shield its residents from the harshness outside its walls. The shockwaves linger in the air long after she disappears around the corner. You recognize them instantly, not because they dress differently, though they do, and not because they walk differently, though that is true too. What gives them away is the way they look at the alley. Their eyes are wide with curiosity, lingering on every crooked wall, every hanging line of laundry, every puddle that glistens with questionable ingredients. They stare the way someone might stare at an exhibit in a museum, not realizing the exhibit can stare back. They enter with the confidence of people who have never had to measure danger by the width of a passage or the angle of a stranger's posture. Their steps are loud, too loud, echoing off the walls like clumsy declarations. People pause in their routines, their conversations thinning into cautious silence. The alley has learned to read threats in small signs, and the arrival of outsiders always tugs at its nerves. A woman in the group points upward at the leaning rooftops, smiling as if she finds the tilt charming rather than hazardous. Another comments on the laundry lines, admiring how the clothes crisscross overhead like a decorative banner. You watch residents stiffen as they pass, eyes narrowing as if trying to decide whether these newcomers are merely naive or genuinely dangerous. Curiosity in a place like this can be ignorance wearing a polite coat. An older man sweeping his stoop steps aside without a word, his gaze fixed on the outsider's boots. They are polished, new. They slap the stones differently than alley shoes, which hesitate where these stride boldly. A child peeks from behind a barrel, sensing something off. Even the cats slink away, vanishing into cracks as if refusing to deal with this level of noise and enthusiasm. The outsiders begin asking questions, loud ones that bounce between the walls. How do people live here? How many families share these rooms? Is it always this cramped? They laugh softly at things that are not funny, and marvel at things that require no marveling. You can feel the discomfort ripple through the alley like a drawn breath held too long. Then one of them steps into a path clearly used by a group of women carrying water. They call out a warning, but he does not understand until a bucket tilts dangerously in his direction. They adjust at the last second, saving him from a soaking and themselves from needing to apologize. He laughs, thinking it a near comedic mishap, while the women exchange glances that say the incident was far from amusing. A boy sitting on a stoop flinches when one outsider bends down to greet him, reaching far too close, unaware of the boundaries that protect children in a place where strangers cannot be trusted. The boy's mother appears with speed you did not know she possessed, placing herself firmly between them with a stare sharp enough to communicate everything that needs to be said without a word. The outsider backs up, cheeks flushing, murmuring something about meaning no harm. It is not malice that unsettles the alley. It is the outsider's lack of caution, the way they move without reading the space, without knowing that trust here is not given freely. The alley responds by tightening. People shift into protective positions. Conversations stop. The community becomes a wall, silent and watchful. When the outsiders finally wander back toward the entrance, still chatting brightly about what an interesting place this is, the residents release a collective exhale. The tension loosens, like the alley itself had been bracing against a sudden gust of wind. You feel it too, the lingering unease. Curiosity can be innocent, but in a fragile place like Double Alley, it is also a force that nudges at wounds that have barely healed. The outsiders disappear into the larger world, stepping into streets that welcome their confidence. The alley, meanwhile, resumes its rhythm, quieter for a moment, as if reminding itself that it endures not because it is inviting, but because the people within it know how to guard what little they have. You first notice the entrance to the attic because it absolutely does not want to be noticed. It hides behind a loose panel above a stair landing so narrow you have to turn sideways just to breathe. The wood creaks when you touch it, the kind of groan that sounds offended rather than fearful. But curiosity wins, as it usually does in places like this. You nudge the panel aside and feel a draft of cool, dust-scented air brush your face, carrying the unmistakable invitation of somewhere you are not supposed to be. You hoist yourself upward, crawling into the dim space where the ceiling dips so low you have to fold yourself like a poorly packed trunk. Thin beams crisscross above you, barely holding the roof in place, and the floorboards shift beneath your weight with the emotional stability of a startled cat. Yet there is something magnetic here, a sense that stories seep into the wood. You can almost hear them whispering if you hold still long enough. Objects lie scattered across the attic, each one abandoned with a haste that suggests secrets rather than clutter. A child's wooden spinning top with one side burned, a letter sealed with wax cracked by time, a boot missing its pair, stuffed with folded paper that rustles when you tap it. You pull the paper free and find only scribbled notes, times, dates, initials. Nothing that makes sense, but everything that hints at someone once watching someone else a little too closely. The crawl space opens into a narrow tunnel that feels like squeezing yourself into the throat of the building. Dust blankets everything, coating your clothes and clinging to your skin as you inch forward. The darkness is thick, but you can sense objects around you. A metal pail knocked onto its side, a woven basket with a broken handle, a bundle of dried herbs tied together with red thread that flakes when you touch it. Each item feels like a question someone hid rather than answered. When you reach the end of the tunnel, you peer down through a gap in the boards and see a room below, lit only by a single flickering candle. No one is inside now, but the remnants of conversation cling to the air. You see the marks on the floor where people sat, the indentation of elbows worn into a desk, and a small tin box left open with nothing inside. Whatever secrets passed through here have already moved on. You crawl back the way you came and find another hatch, this one leading downward into a crawl space barely tall enough for breath. It runs behind several homes, connecting them like a hidden corridor for those who cannot afford to be seen. You move on elbows and knees, the boards brushing your back, and spot more clues scattered along the path. A discarded knife with no rust but a chipped tip, a pouch containing a single coin too foreign to have been used here, a rag doll missing its button eyes, lying face down as though placed that way intentionally. You realize this is where the alley stores its unspoken history. Secrets do not vanish in Double Alley. They settle in attics, crawl spaces, cracks in the walls, tucked away by hands that cannot risk being caught holding them. Every scrap you find feels like a chapter torn from a larger story, one the residents keep alive with silence rather than retelling. When you finally climb back into the light, blinking as your eyes adjust, you understand that the alley hides as much as it reveals. What you saw were only fragments, hints of lives lived in the margins, pieces of truths too fragile or dangerous for daylight. And you have the strange feeling that the secrets you did not find far outnumber the ones you did. You notice the sickness before anyone names it, carried in the rasp of a cough that seems to echo a little too long between the narrow walls. At first it is just one child coughing into a sleeve, then a grandmother clearing her throat with a harsh rattle, then a young man holding his stomach as if trying to steady something shifting inside him. In Double Alley, illness spreads the way whispers do, quietly at first, then all at once, when no one is paying attention. You see how people react, not with panic but with the weary readiness of those who have faced this threat many times before. A woman steps out of her room, carrying a pot of boiled water and herbs, so bitter the steam alone stings your eyes. She hands out small cloths soaked in the mixture, instructing families to press them against their faces to ease breathing. She has no title, no training, but the alley treats her like a healer because she knows more than most and cares enough to try. Children are suddenly kept indoors, though indoors is a generous word for rooms barely large enough for sleep. Curtains are pulled across windows that barely open. People walk differently, keeping their distance, carrying fear in the tightness of their shoulders. Even the usual chatter dims to a lower hum, as if everyone is trying not to disturb whatever invisible thing has started moving among them. Despite the fear, the alley rises to the challenge with a kind of stubborn unity. A man too poor to feed himself properly brings garlic cloves wrapped in cloth to his neighbors, insisting they boil them for protection. Another shares vinegar he has been saving for months, offering spoonfuls like a priceless remedy. Some swear by steam, others by prayers, and a few by aggressively scouring every surface with soap, even if it means using their last sliver. You watch families rearrange their cramped living spaces to isolate the sick, creating partitions out of worn sheets and spare boards. Privacy is impossible here, but effort is not. Every choice feels like both an act of hope and a gamble. You see a mother sitting beside her feverish daughter, fanning her with a piece of cardboard in gentle, steady motions. She mouths quiet assurances the child cannot hear, but she keeps speaking anyway, as if the act itself might help. The alley's unofficial healer visits each home, carrying a basket filled with whatever remedies she has scraped together. Dried, flowers tied into bundles, jars of honey thinned with water, tiny pouches of ground bark. She listens to each cough, examines each fevered face, and gives instructions in a tone that brooks no argument. You realize she is doing everything she can, with nothing more than the belief that doing something is better than doing nothing. You witness small acts of bravery, moments so ordinary they almost vanish unless you look closely. A boy sneaks out to fetch water for his sick father, balancing the bucket with trembling hands. A neighbor sits outside a door through the night, not entering but staying close enough to hear if the breathing inside falters. People check on one another with quiet knocks, each one carrying the unspoken question, "Are you still holding on?" There are losses the alley does not speak of aloud. You see them in the lowered eyes, in the extra care taken when passing a particular doorway. Grief here is a private companion, not a public event, and it settles into the stones without ceremony. But there are also recoveries, slow and fragile, marked by the first spoonful of broth, the first step outside after days of fever, the first unforced smile. When someone improves, the alley exhales, sharing the relief like warmth in winter. You realize survival here is a collective achievement, stitched together from scraps of kindness and sheer determination. By the time the sickness loosens its grip, the alley bears new scars, but it also shows its strength. In a place with nothing to spare, people still find ways to fight for one another, using whatever tools they have, even if those tools are nothing more than company, care, and the refusal to give up. You spot the runaway by accident, a flash of movement at the corner of your eye, quick and small like a stray cat bolting between trash bins. At first you think it is just another child darting through the alley's ribs, but then you notice the way he glances over his shoulder, eyes wide, breath sharp, as if the shadows behind him carry hands reaching out of sight. Without thinking, you follow, pulled by instinct or curiosity or something in his expression that feels too familiar to ignore. He slips into the thinnest parts of Double Alley, the sections where adults rarely tread unless forced. You duck under a sagging clothesline, push past a door left ajar, and round a corner so tight your shoulder grazes the brick. The runaway moves with surprising grace, feet barely touching the cobblestones, as if he has memorized every uneven crack. He jumps over a puddle that smells like disappointment and something worse, then disappears behind a stack of crates, leaning at an angle that suggests structural rebellion. When you reach the crates, he is already climbing a narrow staircase that seems too fragile to hold even him, let alone you. You climb anyway. At the top, he darts into a corridor created entirely by two buildings leaning into each other out of exhaustion. Light filters through the slats above, falling in thin stripes across his face. He pauses for the first time, watching you with an expression that weighs risk against need. You do not speak, and that seems to be the right choice. He nods once, a tiny gesture of acceptance, and continues deeper into the maze. He leads you to a pocket of space hidden behind a collapsed staircase, a tiny refuge filled with scraps, a broken lantern, a worn blanket, a tin cup, a book missing half its pages. It is not much, but you recognize the shape of a life built in hiding. He crouches beside the blanket, running his hand along its frayed edge, grounding himself. His breathing slows, though his shoulders remain tense, as if they have forgotten how to relax. You sit a short distance away, giving him space while still letting him know you are there. The alley mutters around you, noises drifting through the walls, a pot lid clanging, a baby crying faintly, someone shouting about a missing shoe. Life continues in its chaotic rhythm, unaware of the small story unfolding in the gap between buildings. Gradually, the boy begins to talk, not in a steady stream but in fragments that slip out between breaths. You learn he has been traveling alone, using alleys like stepping stones through the city. He came here after slipping away from a place that cared more about discipline than children. He laughs once, a short, brittle sound, and you realize humor for him is a shield rather than an expression of joy. He tells you Double Alley feels safer than anywhere else he has been. Dangerous, yes, but honest in its danger. Here, threats are visible. Here, people who have nothing still share what little they can. Here, he knows who to avoid and who might help. A maze can become sanctuary when it is predictable, even in its unpredictability. You offer him a piece of bread you picked up earlier. He hesitates, then takes it, turning away slightly as he eats, preserving the dignity of someone who has had to accept too many offerings without wanting to. When he finishes, he stands and gestures for you to follow again. He shows you more of his hidden paths. A low tunnel that leads to an abandoned workshop, a rooftop ledge where he sleeps when the air feels kinder than the rooms below, a drain pipe he uses to slip across courtyards without crossing open streets. Each route is a line in a map only he understands. Eventually, he stops at a small doorway leading to a crowded room where a family quietly folds laundry. They look up, see him, and smile with recognition. He nods back, shy but comfortable. They invite him in without hesitation. You understand then that he is not as alone as he thought. Before disappearing inside, he glances at you and gives another small nod. A thank you, tucked inside. Silence. Then he vanishes into the warmth, leaving you in the maze he has mastered. You hear the legends first, as a murmur drifting between windows, little fragments that slip through cracked shutters and settle in the alley, like fog. Night in Double Alley has its own voice, softer than daytime, stretched thin and low, as if the darkness itself leans close to listen. People talk differently after sundown. Laughter becomes sharper, whispers become thicker, and every story grows just enough teeth to make you wonder whether it is meant to scare or simply to entertain. You overhear one whispered by a pair of old men playing a game with bottle caps. They speak of a figure who wanders the rooftops, leaving no footprints, moving with the agility of someone who never learned to doubt their balance. According to them, the rooftop walker steals nothing except unattended shoes, and only from people who brag too loudly. They insist this is why you never boast in Double Alley if you want to keep both shoes. One of the men taps his bare foot for emphasis. You suspect he might be using the legend to excuse his own carelessness, but he retells it with such conviction you almost believe him. Further down, near a cellar, door patched with so many boards, it resembles a wooden quilt. A group of teenagers whisper about the lantern ghost, a figure said to appear only in the narrowest sections of the alley. They say it carries a flickering light that reveals everything you do not want to see. Your flaws, your fears, the thing you keep denying. The ghost never harms you, they claim, but it forces you to meet yourself without excuses, which some people consider far worse. The teenagers laugh nervously, each pretending they would not run if they ever spotted such a glow in the dark. Their laughter sounds a little too bright to be real. Near midnight, a woman sitting on her stoop tells a different story to a small circle of children. Her voice is low and rhythmic, practiced in the art of turning superstition into performance. She tells them about the brick that never stays where it belongs. According to her, there is one loose brick in the alley that shifts every night, appearing in odd corners or beneath unsuspecting feet. If you stumble over it, she says, it means the alley is warning you about someone untrustworthy nearby. The children nod solemnly, clutching their blankets tighter, as though trying to memorize the brick's shifting location. A man fixing a broken shutter adds another layer to the night's tales when he tells you about the musician who disappeared but never stopped playing. They say his violin can still be heard drifting through the alley on certain nights, especially when the fog rolls in thick as wool. He claims that if you follow the sound too far, you will end up lost in a part of the alley that no longer exists, wandering through echoes of places torn down long ago. You want to ask how he knows this, but the way his eyes avoid yours makes you hold the question back. Each story is delivered with the same tone, a mixture of humor, caution, and just enough seriousness to make you wonder. People here do not cling to legends for entertainment alone. They use them to explain the parts of life too complicated for plain truth. The stories soothe children, warn newcomers, and give the residents a way to talk about their fears without naming them directly. As you listen to each tale drift through the darkness, you understand that the legends do more than haunt the alley. They bind it. They stitch the people together with shared superstition, shared laughter, and shared unease. And in a place where reality can be harsh, the stories become a softer way of describing the things everyone already knows in their bones. By the time you settle into a quiet corner, the whispering fades and the night deepens. You can almost imagine the rooftop walker overhead, or the lantern ghost rounding a distant bend, or a violin note swirling through the shadows. The alley feels alive with possibilities, half joke and half warning, exactly as the residents intended. The storm arrives without warning, as if the sky got tired of holding itself together and decided to drop everything at once. One moment the air hangs heavy and motionless, thick enough to chew on, and the next, it cracks open with a rumble that rolls through your bones. Rain falls in sheets so dense you cannot see the far end of the alley, only the shimmering blur of movement as water claims every surface it can reach. You feel the first icy splash against your neck, and then another, and then 100 more as the downpour intensifies. Within seconds, the ground beneath your feet transforms from solid cobblestone to a rushing stream. Water flows with surprising force, gathering speed as it barrels down the narrow slope of Double Alley. You take a cautious step, and the current nudges your ankle like an overeager dog testing its strength. The alley has become a river, and you are standing in the middle of its impatient path. People scramble into doorways and under patched awnings, dragging buckets and crates to safety. Laundry that had been hanging overhead begins to drip wildly, some of it twisting loose and flapping away like surrendered flags. A man curses as a shirt escapes his grasp and disappears downstream, spinning like a leaf caught in a whirlpool. A woman across the way shouts that she never liked that shirt anyway, and her voice barely carries over the roar of the water. The storm reveals every weakness the alley has tried to hide. Leaks burst through patched roofs, creating cascades inside homes that were already cramped enough without indoor rainfall. Wooden steps become slick death traps, and people climb them with a mix of caution and determination, muttering prayers under their breath. You watch a pair of children attempt to rescue a basket floating by, only to be scolded fiercely by their mother, who snatches them inside before the water can sweep all three away. You brace yourself against a wall as the current rises past your ankles. The stones are cold beneath your fingertips, trembling faintly from the force of the rushing water. A barrel breaks loose nearby and barrels toward you with far too much enthusiasm. You dodge just in time, pressing yourself flat against the wall as it thunders past. The storm has transformed everyday objects into hazards, each one bobbing or rolling with unpredictable menace. Despite the chaos, the alley's residents adapt quickly, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who have weathered far too many storms. Someone tosses out a long plank to serve as a makeshift bridge between doorways. Another ties ropes across the narrowest section, giving people something to hold as they cross. A man stands in waist-deep water, guiding others to safety with loud instructions and a confidence that suggests he once dreamed of being a captain, though perhaps not of this particular ship. You notice a child peeking out from a window above, eyes wide with awe rather than fear. The storm has turned the alley into something wild and alive, and for a moment, the child seems delighted by the transformation. Lightning flashes, illuminating the scene in a stark white glow, and the child gasps, ducking back inside. The thunder follows like a scolding parent. As the minutes crawl by, the intensity of the rain begins to ease. The river slows from a furious rush to a determined crawl. People step out cautiously, checking the damage, retrieving objects that survived the impromptu voyage. Someone finds the runaway shirt tangled around a drainpipe and holds it up triumphantly, earning laughter from the balconies above. You wade through the receding water, feeling the weight of the storm lift as the alley slowly reclaims its familiar shape. The ground is slick, the walls dripping, the air thick with the smell of wet stone and damp fabric. But the danger has passed. Residents begin to emerge fully now, shaking their heads and sharing stories of near disasters with a kind of humor that softens fear into memory. The alley looks battered, but alive. And as you stand there, water swirling around your boots, you realize storms here do not simply test the place. They reveal its resilience, its stubborn determination to hold together even when the sky itself tries to wash it clean. You notice the small joys slowly, the way you notice warmth returning to your fingers after standing too long in the cold. They appear in quiet corners, tucked between the harsher moments of alley life, almost shy in how they reveal themselves. Yet once you start looking, you realize they are everywhere. Stubborn little sparks refusing to be smothered by the grit and noise of Double Alley. You see it first in the morning light that manages to slip past the laundry lines, catching the edges of hanging shirts and torn blankets. The fabric glows just for a moment, turning patched cloth into something almost lovely. Residents pause in their routines to enjoy the brief shimmer, lifting their faces toward the hint of warmth like flowers that never learned they were supposed to wilt here. Then there is the baker's son, who sneaks bits of crust to the children when his father is not watching. The bread pieces are small, but the smiles they produce are not. The children crowd around him with conspiratorial grins, clinging to the crumbs as though they were treasures. He hands them out with a flourish, pretending to be a benevolent king distributing riches, and the children play along, bowing deeply before scampering away. Their laughter rises through the alley, light and unburdened, briefly drowning out the usual clatter. You spot another joy in the way neighbors help one another without being asked. When a woman drops a heavy bucket, 3 hands reach down to lift it before she even bends. When an elderly man struggles to move his stool into the sunlit patch that only appears for a handful of minutes each afternoon, 2 young men carry it there for him, adjusting its angle until he is satisfied. He never says thank you. He simply nods once, and they accept it as the highest level of praise. In one corner, a group of friends gathers each evening around a battered table, playing a card game so complicated that onlookers suspect they invented half of the rules on the spot. They argue passionately, accuse one another of impossible cheating techniques, and laugh until they wheeze. Their voices fill the alley with something warm, something that pushes back the weight of the day. You cannot follow the rules, but you find yourself lingering nearby just to absorb the energy. You also notice the small rituals that anchor families. A mother braiding her daughter's hair with steady, practiced motions even when pots clang around them. A grandfather whittling tiny wooden toys for the children, shaping them from scraps of discarded wood with a patience that feels almost sacred. A couple sharing tea brewed so weak it is nearly flavored water, sipping it as though it were a luxury fit for a palace. Their quiet conversation hums like a familiar tune. Joy here does not announce itself boldly. It peeks out from behind hardship, offering small, unexpected comforts. A shared meal made from almost nothing. A song hummed while sweeping. A window cracked just enough to let in a sliver of breeze on a stifling day. A patch of blue sky appearing between the leaning rooftops. You begin to understand why people stay, even when logic suggests they should run in the opposite direction. These small joys add up until the alley feels less like a place defined only by struggle and more like one shaped by resilience. It is not beauty in the traditional sense. It is beauty forged through necessity, through connection, through the incredible human ability to create light in the darkest corners. As you watch a group of children chase each other through puddles left from the earlier storm, their feet splashing wildly, their laughter echoing against the brick, you feel something settle in your chest. This place is sharp and cramped and unpredictable, but it is also alive in a way that quiets cynicism. Here, joy is not given. It is carved out of survival, nurtured with intention, and shared freely among those who need it most. And you understand why. Despite everything, people choose to stay. You hear the celebration before you see it. A sudden blast of sound that rattles the windows and sends a thin drizzle of dust drifting from the rafters above. At first you wonder if another fight has broken out, but the noise is different this time. There is rhythm in it. A clapping pulse that urges you forward, and laughter layered so thick it spills over the walls like an overcrowded pot. You step into the main stretch of Double Alley and find it transformed, as if someone shook the place hard enough to knock loose every scrap of joy hiding in its corners. People have gathered in a swirling mass of movement. Someone has dragged out 3 battered drums that normally serve as stools, and now a pair of teenagers are pounding on them with spoons, sticks, and the kind of enthusiasm that could wake hibernating animals. A woman waves a colored scarf above her head, spinning in slow circles while children trail behind her, each holding whatever makes noise, from tin lids to pebbles in jars. Their improvised orchestra is chaotic, but it somehow fits, creating a rhythm loud enough to make the alley feel wider than it actually is. You weave through the crowd, catching glimpses of small details that hint at why tonight is different. A man with gray hair is being pulled into the center, his face flushed with embarrassment and pride. People clap him on the back, offering congratulations that tumble over one another. You hear someone explain that he found steady work at the docks, his first solid job in years. In any other place, this might warrant a quiet toast. Here, it is enough cause to summon every bit of festivity the alley can muster. Someone shoves a plate into your hands. It holds a heap of fried dough, dusted with sugar so fine it clings to your fingers instantly. You take a bite and almost forget where you are, the sweetness cutting through the usual taste of smoke and damp stone. A young girl passing by flashes you a proud grin, and you realize she is probably the one who made it, or at least helped. Pride moves quickly in Double Alley, spreading faster than gossip. Near the wall, a group of neighbors link arms and sway together, singing a song in unsteady harmony. The lyrics shift between languages, stitched together like every other part of the alley, but the melody carries the same warm current no matter who joins in. Even the usually stern landlord's assistant stands there tapping his foot, though he pretends not to notice when anyone looks directly at him. As the music grows louder, someone lights a string of tiny lanterns and hangs them between 2 leaning rooftops. The glow they cast is faint but golden, turning the cracked stones below into a stage. The air smells of fried food, spilled beer, and a little smoke drifting from a fire someone probably should not have built in a metal bucket. But the mixture is oddly comforting, like breathing in a memory you never knew you had. The man at the center finally gives in to the pressure around him and begins to dance. His steps are clumsy, joyful, entirely unself-conscious. The crowd cheers as if he were performing on a grand stage, not on cobblestones slick with the remnants of the afternoon rain. Children dart through the legs of the adults, shrieking with excitement, and someone starts drumming faster, daring the dancers to keep up. For a moment, you stop moving and simply take it all in. The lights, the laughter, the messy joy, overflowing from people who usually carry so much weight on their shoulders. This is not a celebration born of luxury. It is born of relief, of survival, of the rare chance to feel something lift rather than press down. And as the alley sways and sings and shakes dust from its rafters, you understand that moments like this are not just rare. They are essential. Here, joy is something fought for, preserved, and shared with absolute generosity, because everyone knows how fragile it can be. You start to notice the influence long before you see any faces. It hides in the corners of conversations, in the way people pause before speaking a certain name, in the tightness that creeps into shoulders when footsteps echo from the main street. Corruption here is not a rumor. It is a presence, steady and invisible, like dampness that seeps into the bricks no matter how often the walls are scrubbed. You see its fingerprints first in the rents. The numbers never appear written anywhere. Yet somehow they rise and fall with the seasons, always in favor of the men who collect them. Residents line up at the start of each month, palms already sweaty, clutching coins wrapped in scraps of cloth. No one argues about the amounts, not because they agree with them, but because arguing guarantees trouble. And trouble here is efficient, delivered with a smile that does not reach the eyes of the man who keeps the ledgers. The collectors do not bother to hide their entitlement. They stroll into Double Alley as if inspecting property they do not want to be seen touching. They carry themselves with a confidence too clean for a place where most people tiptoe out of habit. When they speak, they soften their voices into something polite, even warm, the kind of warmth a snake might use to lull anything nervous enough to flee. They look at the residents with faint amusement, as though humanity itself is a theater they have grown bored of watching. You follow one of these men as he makes his rounds, a polished boot tapping lightly on the uneven stones. People fade into doorways at his approach, shrinking in size, in presence, in breath. He asks no questions. He does not need to. The alley answers for them in frightened silence. Coins clink into his pouch in steady rhythm, each one a reminder of how tightly the alley is bound to those who live outside it. Behind him walks another man, carrying a small notebook. He writes nothing. He only pretends to. The charade gives the impression of order, of documentation, of fairness. When everyone knows the rules change depending on who needs a favor and who refuses one. His blank pages might as well be empty threats, and still, people behave as though each page carries their fate. You hear from a neighbor that the officials charge extra for repairs that never happen, collecting fees to fix leaks that continue dripping, to replace beams still splintering, to patch roofs that sag a little more each winter. The alley pays because it cannot afford not to. Complaints vanish before reaching anyone who cares. Paperwork disappears. Names are misplaced. Promises dissolve the moment the men turn the corner. You see their true power in the eyes of the residents. Fear here is not dramatic. It is practical, a tool shaped by experience. People know how quickly pressure can turn into eviction, how easily a missing coin can become a broken door frame, how often those meant to protect are the ones causing the damage. You feel this understanding settle in your stomach like a stone, yet the influence of these officials goes beyond money. They decide who gets watched, who gets warned, who gets left alone. They turn a blind eye to certain operations tucked in the shadows as long as their pockets stay heavy. They choose which trouble to ignore and which to punish, and the choices always benefit the same people. The alley knows this, accepts it the way one accepts an unchangeable weather pattern, and works around it with silent resilience. What surprises you is how subtly the residents resist. A woman slips an extra loaf to a neighbor who paid too much this month. A man pretends to drop coins but slides them into a child's hand instead. People help one another without ever naming it defiance. They hold on to dignity in the small ways the officials cannot. Steal, finding strength in connection rather than confrontation. As you watch the collectors leave, their boots stepping back into cleaner streets, you feel the alley exhale the breath it was forced to hold. The residents return to their routines, patched roofs dripping, laundry swaying, lives continuing as if corruption were just another part of the architecture. It is not bravery that keeps them here, nor helplessness. It is the quiet understanding that while the officials profit from every inch of Double Alley, they will never truly understand it. That resilience, woven into every stone and whispered between every doorway, belongs only to the people who live within its cramped, stubborn heart. You realize the rituals are already happening around you, long before you recognize them for what they are. At first they seem like simple habits, the sort everyone picks up without thinking, but in Double Alley, nothing is ever truly simple. Each motion, each routine, each choice has been shaped by necessity, hammered into muscle memory by the tightness of life here. Survival is not an event, it is a rhythm. You notice it in the way people step outside each morning with a split second of stillness, as if taking the alley's temperature. They check the sky for weather, the ground for puddles, the corners for trouble. They listen, too, because sound is often the first warning. A quiet alley can mean peace, or it can mean something waiting. The residents read the silence the way scholars read texts, scanning for meaning hidden between the lines. You see a woman inspect her bucket before walking to fetch water, testing the handle for cracks with a flick of her thumb. She has done this so many times, she does not look down at all. Her fingers know the story of the metal better than her eyes. A man pauses before climbing a staircase that barely deserves the name, testing each step with the toe of his boot, ready to shift his balance if the wood decides. Today is the day it gives up. He carries himself like someone who has fallen enough times to understand gravity, holds grudges. Children emerge from doorways in small bursts, darting into the alley with the agility of lifelong acrobats. They know which stones wobble, which walls crumble, which puddles hide suspicious depths. Their morning ritual is a kind of dance, weaving between hazards, racing towards scraps of sunlight that peek between rooftops. They scream and laugh, their joy so loud it almost masks the sharp awareness in their movements. They play, but they play like survivors. Vendors set up their makeshift stalls with the precision of seasoned engineers. A man selling potatoes arranges them in a pyramid that somehow stays upright despite the uneven ground. A woman offering dried fish hangs her goods high enough to avoid stray cats, but low enough for customers to sniff suspiciously before buying. Coins exchange hands in quick motions, always counted twice, sometimes thrice, as if mistrust itself has become part of the commerce. By midday, the heat squeezes into the alley like an unwelcome guest, and the rituals shift. People retreat to shaded corners, conserving energy the way others conserve money. Someone fans a fire grate to keep the smoke thin enough not to choke the neighbors. Someone else pours water along the dustiest stretch of ground to keep it from rising in clouds. These are not acts of courtesy alone. They are survival tactics disguised as kindness, each one ensuring the alley remains livable for another day. You notice how food is prepared with the same careful routine. Every scrap is used, every bone boiled until it surrenders flavor, every vegetable trimmed to the edge of possibility. Meals are often shared not because people have extra, but because sharing creates invisible debts that bind the alley together. Today's bowl might come from one neighbor, tomorrow's slice of bread from another. No one keeps track openly, but everyone remembers. Evening brings a different set of rituals. Doors are closed with a twist that checks the latch twice. Lanterns are lit and hung where they will cast the least enticing glow for thieves but enough light for safety. Families gather close, speaking in low voices, recounting the day's small victories. A repair that held, a job that paid, a child who escaped injury by a hair's breadth. The alley winds down like an old clock, ticking softly, settling gently. And through it all, you understand that these routines are not just survival strategies. They are expressions of resilience carved into daily life. They turn danger into something manageable, fear into something predictable. They create a sense of order where chaos could easily take root. Watching them, you feel yourself drawn into the rhythm, your steps adjusting, your eyes sharpening, your breath sinking with the quiet pulse of people who have learned to live with so little and still find ways to move forward. By nightfall, the rituals have prepared the alley for sleep, fragile but intact. And you realize that in Double Alley, survival is not heroic, it is habitual, a steady, practiced choreography that keeps everyone standing for one more day. You feel the pressure long before you can name it. It settles into the stones beneath your feet, humming with a restlessness that does not belong to Double Alley. The city beyond the walls is stretching, growing louder and brighter each day, and its expansion presses inward like a tide that has no interest in the lives already rooted here. You sense it in the way the air shifts, carrying strange scents from new factories, new shops, new people, each one signaling that the old borders are slipping. You notice the change first in the noise. Carriages pass more frequently along the main street, wheels clattering with a confidence that makes the alley tremble. Voices from outside drift in with less caution, people laughing about construction plans and widened roads, their words floating over the rooftops like announcements from another world. Even the birds that used to perch along the gutters seem agitated, hopping from ledge to ledge as if scouting for safer nesting grounds. Then come the workers, measuring the alley's edges with long wooden poles, drawing lines on parchment while pretending not to stare at the residents watching them from shadowed doorways. They murmur to each other about potential routes and improvements, never considering the people listening. You catch pieces of their conversations, enough to understand the implication. The city wants to reach inward, to swallow this cramped world and reshape it into something cleaner, straighter, more profitable. The alley, to them, is simply in the way. The residents sense it too. You see it in their posture. They move with a tension that was not here before, shoulders lifting slightly every time someone from outside steps in uninvited. Conversations stop more abruptly, glances sharpen, and people gather in clusters not to gossip but to speculate. No one knows exactly what the city intends, but everyone knows what expansion usually means for places like this. Rent collectors have already started adjusting their demands, their smiles growing tighter, their warnings layered with new threats. A man boasts that the property will soon be valuable, as if value were something measured in coin rather than lives lived in narrow rooms. He pats the wall with mock affection, ignoring the fact that the wall does not belong to him in any way that matters. You sense the shift in the market stalls, too. Vendors talk about rumors that licenses will soon be required, that fees will double, that space will shrink until there is no room at all. They keep selling their goods with steady hands, but their eyes flick toward the street more often than they used to, watching for signs of the future arriving too quickly. A child asks her mother what will happen to their home if the city decides to build something new here. The mother hesitates for a moment, just a heartbeat, before giving the kind of reassuring answer that sounds too smooth to be honest. You see the way she squeezes her daughter's hand afterward, as if trying to convince herself as well. Even the alley itself seems to sense the coming shift. Cracks in the walls look deeper in the changing light, and the stones carry the faint vibrations of construction happening somewhere just beyond reach. The familiar rhythm of the place feels disrupted, replaced by a nervous tapping, as though the alley's heartbeat has begun to skip. Yet amid the tension, you also see a quiet defiance forming. People talk in whispers about ways to protect what they have. A man repairs his doorway even though demolition might be looming. A woman plants herbs in a small pot on her windowsill, insisting that life continues until it no longer can. Children still run through the alley, shouting with the same wild joy as always, unaware of how fragile their playground has become. You realize the pressure of change is not just external. It pushes inward, forcing people to reckon with the possibility that the world they built in this tight, stubborn space might soon be threatened by forces far larger than any of them. The alley holds its breath, balancing between what has been and what might come, waiting to see which direction the city will push next. You feel the determination building long before you notice any outward sign of it. It moves through Double Alley, the way warmth slowly spreads through a room after someone lights a stove, soft at first, then unmistakable. The pressure from the outside world continues to squeeze in, but instead of folding, the alley stiffens. It is like watching a narrow street square its shoulders. You see it in the way residents talk to one another, voices quieter but sharper, threaded with a resolve that feels older than any of them. People gather in doorways and stairwells, not to lament the future, but to plan around it. A carpenter mends a railing even though everyone knows inspectors might soon claim the building is unsafe. She hammers each nail with the intensity of someone daring the world to say her work does not matter. Nearby, a tailor patches a jacket with extra care, stitching in a pattern she says her grandmother used, insisting that traditions remain even when walls do not. Children adapt too. They run through the alley with the same quick feet, but with new awareness, calling warnings to each other when strangers enter, moving in synchronized patterns as if the alley itself taught them how to flow around danger. They treat every new surveyor like an unwanted guest at a crowded dinner table, slipping past them with pointed politeness that borders on theatrical. You cannot help but notice how the children's eyes gleam with something fiercely protective. The gossip network becomes more efficient than ever. Whispers pass from window to window with astonishing speed, carrying news of officials, landlords, and unfamiliar faces who might pose a threat. That old woman with the boiling cabbage becomes a commander of information, stirring her pot with one hand while sending coded messages with the other. If a stranger blinks too slowly, she will know their life story before the spoon hits the bottom of the pot. At night, lanterns light up more windows than before, glowing like little declarations of presence. People stay awake longer, talking about what the alley once was and what it could still be. Stories weave together, some exaggerated, some entirely true, but all carrying a stubborn pride. You listen as an older man recounts how his father built their home board by board, after arriving with nothing but a scrap of bread and an accent no one understood. Another woman describes how she survived her first winter in Double Alley, learning to barter warmth, food, and favors the way others trade coin. There is no single rallying moment, no dramatic speech from a rooftop. The resistance is quieter, built from countless small acts. A broom sweeping the steps at dawn, a pot of stew shared between neighbors, a hand steadying a ladder that threatens to wobble. It becomes clear that the alley is not fighting with fists or torches, but with memory, routine, presence. It defends itself by existing loudly in a space that wants it silent, yet the forces outside do not slow. The city continues to expand, sending new workers with new papers and new measurements. They walk through Double Alley with the air of people convinced the world operates according to their diagrams. But every time they arrive, the residents respond with deliberate calm. A woman offers them tea, blocking their view just long enough to disrupt their careful calculations. A boy bumps into a measuring pole and apologizes with suspicious enthusiasm. People stand in doorways not threateningly, but in numbers large enough that the workers must ask permission to pass. You watch all of this and realize Double Alley is not simply resisting change. It is defending an identity shaped through hardship, community, humor, grief, and stubborn survival. Even if the walls crumble, the spirit coiled inside this narrow world refuses to flatten. The alley stands as a reminder that some places fight not with force, but with the unshakable belief that their stories deserve to continue. You step out of Double Alley expecting the city to feel familiar again, but it does not. The street ahead is wide, bright, and loud in the way only New York can be, yet you stand there caught between two worlds that somehow share the same ground. Carriages rattle past with polished wheels and well-fed horses. Vendors shout prices with voices that carry confidence instead of hunger, and the buildings seem to stretch upward with a smug sort of pride. Everything feels cleaner, faster, more assured. It is as if the city has no idea what beats at its own ribs. You take a few steps forward, still half listening for the sounds you have grown used to. The clatter of laundry poles knocking together, the slosh of buckets dragged across stone, the quick shuffle of children navigating danger with casual expertise. Out here, the noises are sharp and arranged, each one fitting neatly into the grand hum of progress. You realize the alley has spoiled you with its unpredictable rhythm, its strange harmony formed from chaos, sweat, and stubbornness. You try to match your stride to the city's pace, but find your feet hesitating, still tuned to the cramped pulse behind you. People brush past you without a glance, moving with the assurance of those who expect space to open for them. Their clothes are crisp, their faces unbothered, carrying none of the shadows you saw in Double Alley, none of the grit tucked into their smiles. It hits you that most of them have never squeezed sideways between buildings just to breathe. They have never bartered for goods using favors instead of coin. They have never watched a pot of cabbage double as the morning news. They move like the city belongs to them, unaware that entire worlds exist just a few steps away, worlds built on cramped resilience rather than polished ambition. You pause at a crossroads where the street splits, one way leading deeper into the polished city, and the other winding back toward the hidden cracks where people survive through sheer will. You watch the flow of strangers and feel the strange dissonance of carrying something they cannot see. The alley has sharpened your senses, taught you to notice the quiet negotiations behind every gesture, the quick assessments people make to gauge safety, the unspoken alliances formed by those who rely on each other because no one else will. The smells out here are different too. Fresh bread, hot tar, roasted peanuts from a cart, all pleasant enough. Yet they lack the dense truth of the alley's scents. In Double Alley, the air carried stories in every waft, even the foul ones. A pot boiling meant someone was trying to stretch a meal. Smoke curling from a window signaled someone fixing something that broke for the third time that week. Out here, scents feel like decoration rather than communication. You realize the alley did something to your understanding of the city. It peeled away the grand illusion, revealing the machinery that makes places like this function. It showed you the city's bones, not the glossy skin it likes to show outsiders. New York feels bigger now, and smaller at the same time. Enormous in ambition, yet held together by hidden pockets of humanity no map will ever mark. As you continue walking, the sounds of Double Alley linger in your mind, threading themselves between the city's sharper notes. You carry them with an unexpected sense of responsibility, as though simply knowing that place exists connects you to it long after you leave. The alley changed you, not with dramatic lessons or sweeping revelations, but through the quiet insistence of its daily survival. It taught you that the city is not one world, but countless ones layered together, each narrow space holding stories just as powerful as the grand avenues. You walk on, but you keep glancing back, aware that somewhere behind the brick and noise, Double Alley continues, breathing in its tight, rhythmic way, unchanged by your leaving, yet somehow shaping the way you see everything ahead.